How much did Bob Stoops disrespect Josh Heupel? Well, it goes back more. Did a lot of research. It goes back further than just firing him in 2014. Here is where Bob Stoops erred, and that was going with a co-offensive coordinator and not giving Josh Heupel free rein. Had he not done that, I believe Josh Heupel, from what I've seen, would be a successful head coach at the University of Oklahoma. Co-offensive coordinators never work. Josh Heupel would have just slid right into that role when Bob Stoops retired. Instead, he has to traverse the country in resurrecting his coaching career. I wonder what Oklahoma will do, since he did finish second in the Heisman race, since he did win them a national championship. How do you think the reaction will be for Josh Heupel when Tennessee takes on Oklahoma, Caleb?
I think for Josh Heupel, the reaction from from Oklahoma fans will be positive. I don't think that most of them hold any grudge against him. Now, that might change if Heupel tries to run up the score on him, which you and I think he will. And they probably know that, but I don't think they want to. I think they're not going to give him fodder to run up the score right now. So I think as of right now, the reaction to Josh Heupel will be warm from Oklahoma. And look, we'll get to it in a second, but when I say Bob Stoops may have disrespected Josh Heupel, it's not like he tried to disrespect Josh Heupel. I just think that he accidentally let some things slip.
Yeah, and so then they go with a Brent Venables, and the jury's still out on Venables, but I don't like the long-term future of him. Last year, he won 10 games, but he was 1-2 against ranked opponents, and this year's schedule is an absolute beast, and I'll go through that. If Josh Heupel's an A, and I think you have to be an A+, to be an A+, you have to win a championship. Is that fair?
Fair enough. Totally with you on that.
So you with me with Josh Heupel's an A in what we've seen so far?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. So what's Brent Venables?
I mean, what we've seen so far, he took an 11-2 team and went 6-7, and now he's getting credit for going 10-3. By all accounts, he's a C- and maybe a D at this point.
Here's the other thing, and this sounds a lot like I don't think he's as bad as Jeremy Pruitt. I'm not comparing the two, but Tennessee and Oklahoma are not the kind of schools where you test out a coordinator to see if he can be a head coach. That to me tells me it's a bad hire. It could be a surprisingly good hire in a couple of years if Venables proves me wrong. But are you telling me that Tennessee was okay with a Jeremy Pruitt coordinator hire? I mean, everybody's okay at the press conference, but it soon goes downhill. I think Venables is going to have a tough year. I think he'll be on the hot seat next year if that happens. And Caleb, none of that had to happen, but it's good for Tennessee because Tennessee's in much better shape with Josh Heupel as a successful coach, but also as an engaging, exciting coach. Also as a guy that's hand in hand with Danny White. Danny White is taking care of him, and we're going to get to Danny White, and that's why I've never worried about Josh Heupel going to Oklahoma, and we've seen that. But I do want to see the fan reaction. Do they cheer him? Do they boo for him? And we're going to put that as our poll question. Oklahoma fans should boo Josh Heupel, or Oklahoma fans should cheer for Josh Heupel. Now, I'm not suggesting for a second that you go, yay, Nico threw another touchdown. Keep scoring, Josh. But when they introduce him, you should cheer. Does Oklahoma have that much class, Caleb? What do you think?
Yes. I think they'll cheer him when he's introduced. I absolutely think they'll cheer him when he's introduced. And so I don't think that'll be an issue.
Okay. Now, let me ask you this. What happens if Josh Heupel does what you and I think may happen, and that is potentially run up the score?
Oh, well, then they'll get upset, and they may throw a boo at the end, but then many of them may say, okay, we understand it. So Yeah, I think that'll be fine. But I wanted to get to what Bob Stoops was saying about
Yes.
Josh Heupel, because
Mhm.
on Twitter, Bob Stoops, for those who, we didn't talk about this earlier in the week, but Bob Stoops basically released a statement of how his statement was that he wasn't going to make a statement, guys. That was his statement. However, in not making a statement, he misspelled Josh Heupel's name.
Yes.
And Dave's got a great column on this right now. But he says, Bob Stoops' statement was, I have great respect for both coaches. I'm grateful for their great work here at OU. Brent as a coach here for 13 years, including our national championship. Josh is our national championship quarterback and coach for 10 years. I've often said he's the MVP of all my recruits because he was the catalyst that got us started in 99. By the way, there were two misspellings on this. He misspelled Heupel's name. He said Huepel, and then he said catalyst that go us started in 99. He missed a T, forgot.
Okay.
Which leads me to believe, then he says, I wish them great success moving forward. But in the end, I'm all Boomer Sooner, which says I'm probably rooting for Oklahoma because I coached there. I get it. But he wishes them great success.
Now, we talked last night, and you didn't have much of a problem with the tweet or the statement. I do, because I think it's a huge sign of disrespect. And hit like and subscribe if you agree, especially hit like. And we'll get that as a poll question, but tell me what you think about the misspelling. And so it either tells me one of two things. He didn't write the thing, which is common in public relations and statements you see from people, or he just really didn't care and threw it together. That to me, either way, is incredibly disrespectful of somebody that won you a national championship, coached and played for you for nearly 2 decades. I mean, I'm not going to forget how to spell Caleb. It's easier than Heupel, but after we're together 15 years and retire into the sunset, I'm not going to forget how to spell Caleb Calhoun's name. That to me, somebody else wrote it, or he just threw it together and said, I'm not going to talk. Either way, that is highly disrespectful, in my opinion.
Yeah, let's go a step further on this, Dave. Josh Heupel is the only reason that Bob Stoops lasted at Oklahoma so long. He became known as Bob Big Game Choke Artist for the longest time. And the only thing he was resting his laurels on was winning a national championship in 2000 with Josh Heupel at quarterback.
Mm-hmm.
And sorry?
Yes, no, go right ahead. You're right. I mean, there is no Stoops. There's not a Heupel. That's the thing that I found through my research. I mean, there's not that first championship, and there's probably not the later success that he had because of the championship. Do you agree or disagree with that?
1,000% agree. Like 1,000% agree. If he doesn't get that championship in 2000, I can safely say Bob Stoops probably would have been fired at the end of the 2005 season. I'm just going to say it. He would have been. And because that was an underwhelming year. They had been choking in national championships. They had gotten blown out 2 years in a row in 03 and 04 by LSU and then USC. So I'm actually willing to safely say Bob Stoops would have gotten fired after 2005 if Tennessee didn't win a national championship. So he should be showing much more respect to Josh Heupel. To me, this is an admission that I think he's just scared to say anything because he knows he railroaded Josh Heupel. And even though they have been together since John Hoover told us at some Hall of Fame thing, look, I'm going to be honest. I think there's way more bad blood there than we realize. And I think Bob Stoops knows there's bad blood. You know what it reminds me of, Dave? I'll give you a quick example.
Lay it on me.
It's much, much less. But do you remember when Philip Fulmer started Eric Ainge over Rick Clausen at LSU? Eric Ainge gets hurt. Rick Clausen comes in and leads the comeback.
That was the bouquet toss throw, yes.
Philip Fulmer was touting, it was the most awkward interview I ever saw. It was Fulmer and Clausen with Holly Rowe at the end of that game. Fulmer was touting Rick Clausen, like, great story, he's tough. Rick Clausen wouldn't even acknowledge Philip Fulmer. He was so upset with Philip Fulmer for not naming him the starter when he felt that he was clearly the better quarterback of the two.
And every player on that team thought he was the better fit. That was the issue that split that team altogether, is every player on that team thought that they just needed a game manager, a Trent Dilfer, to deal the ball out. Now, we could discuss whether or not you need the big arm of Ainge, and we would both agree that he's far more talented than Rick Clausen, and the future was Ainge. So I understood the move at the time, But regardless, when you forced Ainge down that team's throat, they revolted, split, whatever you want to call it. Now, how do you tie that back into this situation?
The reason I tie it back in is it's the quarterback-coach relationship. Bob Stoops would typically say classy things about Heupel, but at that Hall of Fame event, I'm pretty sure Heupel barely wants to acknowledge Bob Stoops. And I tie it to Fulmer and Clausen because if you remember that interview, Fulmer was then starting to say, we love Rick Clausen, yada, yada, yada. And Rick Clausen never wanted to acknowledge Philip Fulmer, ever, after that. And I think Rick Clausen's refusal to acknowledge Philip Fulmer out of his resentment that he felt he should have been the starter the whole time also tore the team apart. I see that with Josh Heupel and Bob Stoops in a much larger scale where I think Josh Heupel, he really resents Bob Stoops and he doesn't want to show it. And I think Bob Stoops knows that. So Bob Stoops should have taken the Philip Fulmer approach and saying, this quarterback may hate me. I'm a big boy. I can take it. I'll still tout him and praise him and everything. But instead, he releases this statement basically saying, I'm hands off. I don't want to be asked about it. I don't want anything to say. Well, you're really scared then to acknowledge your failures because it's well documented now that you railroaded Josh Heupel for your own to save your own self, as you wrote in your book. I mean, as you wrote in your column.
Oh God, I'm not writing another book. New poll question brought to you by Banks and Jones, dealing with Josh Heupel and Bob Stoops, spelled Stuups. Well, it's because they're Tennessee's trial attorney. You can play to win with Banks and Jones because they'll go to trial. You've heard of other lawyers. They say they'll go to trial and fight for you. They won't. They just want to settle. That's the easiest way out. Well, that's not Banks and Jones, led by T. Scott Jones. They won't settle. They'll go to trial for you. Tennessee's trial attorney. They play to win. Truly, Tennessee's trial attorney when it comes to criminal defense or personal injury. Why settle? Banks and Jones, T. Scott Jones, banksandjones.com. All right, so the poll question is up now. Did Josh Heupel, Huepel, get dissed by Bob Stoops, Stuups? Heck yeah, 78%. Nah, I just can't spell, 22%. Well, there are two misspellings in it. I think it's a little bit of both. I think Bob Stoops probably struggles with letters. Okay? I mean, there are 26 of them. At least I know that. Not sure if he does. But there are 26 of them, and that's a lot of letters to keep track of, right?
Oh my gosh, this is just too funny.
Okay, no, that's 26 letters. I mean, if there were just 16 or 18 letters, then it's manageable. But 26 letters all the way from A to Z, you're expecting a football coach to know all of those letters, and you're expecting him to be able to spell when he's seen his title on the door in the football office for 15 years, and he's seen the back of the jersey. I mean, and he didn't take it down all week. You could have taken it down or just say, I'm sorry. And he's tweeted other stuff. Listen, here's the bottom line. Bob Stoops never believed in Josh Heupel. Didn't believe in him as a quarterback. They wanted to go out and get Achilles Smith. Didn't believe in him as a coach because he made him co-coordinator with Jay Norvell, who's now at Colorado State and is okay. But he got a head coaching job. He didn't believe in him when he thought, I'll just go get Lincoln Riley. When if he was any sort of coach with any sort of loyalty, and I don't expect loyalty out of coaching, but if you know ball, you had to know you had as good of a coach right there that had given his all for your university as opposed to a guy named Lincoln Riley at East Carolina. Now, to me, I feel this way about Philip Fulmer, with all due respect to Philip. He doesn't need to have any input into the program. Oklahoma fans, if you're out there, I'm curious. Post in the board. Do you want Bob Stoops to have anything to do with your program? Because despite his success, he really bumbled his way through the final years.
Oh, he absolutely screwed it up. I would say this too, and here's where it was a really big, a giant bumble. Even if you believed in Josh Heupel, the one thing, you know what the original sin was, Dave? It wasn't actually firing Josh Heupel. It was hiring him. And I don't mean that as if he's not a great coach, because he's an amazing coach, and I think Tennessee should be glad to have him. You never hire beloved players at your school. Do you know do you know that you're just asking for a long-term disaster of a relationship? Because things can end so sour. You talk about following a legend. I talk about this because very seldom does this work out. I mean, we're talking Steve Spurrier at Florida. Okay, legend at the school, was very successful. How many Spurriers are there, though?
There's roughly one.
Exactly. Literally one.
I literally cannot think. That's why everybody wanted to bring back Peyton Manning as a coach. Good gravy. First of all, he wouldn't take the pay cut for extra work. Second of all, I don't know that he can coach, because a lot of those guys hold themselves to such a high standard that they get frustrated when other guys aren't held. They don't hold themselves to the same standard. In other words, Michael Jordan, I don't think was a good GM or teammate for the Wizards. I think the one exception I would give you that has had great success and has gone on, especially Josh Heupel, who's an overachiever, would maybe be Larry Bird, who was Executive of the Year, Coach of the Year, and Player of the Year. I mean, that's only, and that's not for the Celtics.
No, and it was a little bit different too, because Larry Bird was more of I mean, I would trust LeBron James too, because those guys as wing players get players all involved, whereas Michael Jordan is an assassin and just demands everybody come along with him. I don't know if what I said makes sense, but I actually mostly agree with you on this. And
mostly, what's your issue?
No. I do mostly agree. It depends on the makeup of the player. Here's the issue with Peyton Manning and Michael Jordan, why they can never be coaches. It's not actually that they can't understand why people aren't as good as they are. They understand that. It's that they are so driven, they are so motivated, they can't understand why people aren't as motivated as they are. I mean, Jimmy actually told the story one time. I think you know about it, Dave. Jimmy Hyams tells a story where Peyton was seen hauling 2 giant trash bags one day around campus, and it was just tapes he was trying to get into the film room to study everything he possibly could over Christmas break. And Peyton Manning, I would never forget when he first signed with Denver. He at one point said, I really hate that we can't do 3-a-days anymore. I really wish we could do that, because I really got to get in rhythm with these guys. And everybody was like, are you kidding me? We don't want to do 3-a-days.
Yeah. All right. So I just, after doing the research, I got a lot less respect for Bob Stoops than I did previously. And I'll be honest with you, I didn't have any strong feelings, but I got to be honest with you, he just mishandled this whole situation. And it feels like him hanging around the program when and if they do have to replace Brent Venables is just going to hurt them. And I go back to the way Lincoln Riley left. If Josh Heupel had been in that position, he wouldn't have bolted for Southern California. Do you know who they were reportedly looking for? Well, you do, because it's in my column. Who they were reportedly looking at as replacements for Riley, who pulled a Lane Kiffin on them and left without really giving any sort of warning whatsoever. They were looking at Shane Beamer, Mark Stoops.
It's a laughable list.
And Cliff Kingsbury in the NFL. I mean, 3 guys that we could argue whether or not they'd be successful at Oklahoma, but I think we can all agree they have glass ceilings. They might get to 9 wins, but they're not going to win you national championships, right?
No, not at all. They will not. No, they're not winning you national titles. And Mark Stoops knows that. That's why he's staying right where he is at Kentucky. He's got this. Was it John Adams who told us he's got the sweetest gig in America, doesn't he?
Got a pretty sweet gig.
A couple million a year, get your 6. Coaching at Kentucky for football and being a role player in the NBA are the 2 greatest gigs in the world. You have no pressure and you can collect a check, a big one.
Not a bad deal. Not a bad deal whatsoever.